dazzling Hollywood gala, all eyes were locked on Keanu Reeves as he stepped onto the red carpet, his effortless charm stealing the spotlight until chaos erupted. A desperate young girl suddenly broke through security, clinging to his leg, her voice trembling as she begged for help. What she confessed to him in that moment was so shocking that Keanu didn't hesitate. He shut down the entire event on the spot. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're watching from, and if you love stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. The entrance to the majestic plaza shimmered with opulence, the towering glass doors reflecting the golden glow of the evening sun. Keanu Reeves, ever the epitome of understated elegance, adjusted the cufflinks on his tailored blue suit as he stepped inside. The weight of constant attention was something he had learned to carry, but tonight, an unfamiliar unease clung to him. Inside, the venue buzzed with energy. Staff in crisp uniforms guided high-profile guests through lavishly decorated halls. Chandeliers dripped with crystal, their light bouncing off polished marble floors. Keanu's gaze swept over the grandeur, taking in the extravagant details as he moved towards the VIP lounge. Opting for the grand staircase instead of the crowded elevator, he ascended with his usual quiet grace, acknowledging familiar faces with nods and subtle smiles. At the top, a staff member, hand poised on the frosted glass doors, greeted him with a respectful nod before revealing the heart of the elite gathering. The VIP lounge was a perfect blend of classic Hollywood grandeur and modern luxury, warm yet ostentatious. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and gourmet hors d'oeuvres. A live jazz quartet played softly in the background, their melodies weaving through hushed conversations between movie stars, tech moguls, and socialites. Despite his years in the spotlight, Keanu always felt like both an observer and a participant at events like this. A staff member approached with a tray of drinks. "Good evening, Mr. Reeves," the young man greeted him with practiced politeness. "Would you care for a drink? We have champagne, whiskey, and a signature cocktail inspired by tonight's theme." Keanu's lips curled into a small smile. "Whiskey's fine, thanks." The tumbler of amber liquid was placed in his hand, the smooth burn grounding him as he made his way to a quieter corner of the lounge. Settling into a plush velvet armchair, he watched the room unfold, the director dramatically telling a story, the billionaire whispering to a supermodel, the effortless mingling of Hollywood's elite. But then, something shifted. A commotion near the entrance. The atmosphere tensed as heads turned, whispers rippling through the room. Keanu's eyes locked onto the scene just as the crowd parted to reveal the source of the disturbance. At first, it was just a man, confident, poised, clearly someone of importance, moving through the guests with a presence that commanded attention. But behind him, a young girl followed, wide-eyed as she took in the extravagant surroundings. She seemed out of place among the glitz and glamour. The man approached Keanu's secluded spot, his hand already extended, a polished smile on his face. "Keanu Reeves," he said smoothly, his voice laced with charisma. "Victor Langham. It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Keanu stood, returning the handshake with his signature warmth. "Nice to meet you, Victor." Victor's grin widened as he gestured toward the girl beside him. "And this is my daughter, Sophie. She's been dying to meet you all night, haven't you, sweetheart?" Sophie, dressed casually in a denim jacket and jeans, looked up at Keanu with a mix of awe and nerves. Under the glow of the chandeliers, her big eyes shimmered. Her voice, barely above a whisper, trembled as she finally spoke. "You're Keanu Reeves." Keanu's expression softened. He had no idea that in the next few moments, everything was about to change. As Keanu crouched down to Sophie's eye level, he offered a gentle smile and extended his hand. "That's me," he said softly. "And you are?" "I'm Sophie," she replied, her small hand disappearing into his as they shook. "I've seen all your movies. You're my favorite actor." Keanu chuckled warmly. "Well, thank you, Sophie. That's really kind of you. Do you have a favorite movie?" Before she could answer, Victor's hand tightened ever so slightly on her shoulder. Now, sweetheart," he interrupted smoothly, his tone light but firm. let's not take up too much of Mr. Reeves' time. I'm sure he's very busy tonight. Keanu glanced up at Victor, noticing the tension behind his polished smile. Something felt off. It's no bother at all, Keanu assured him, his tone calm but deliberate. I always enjoy meeting fans, especially ones as enthusiastic as Sophie. Victor's smile widened, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. That's very gracious of you. Perhaps we could get a quick photo for Sophie's memory book? Of course, Keanu nodded, standing up straight. I'd be happy to. As Victor pulled out his phone, Keanu noticed Sophie's excitement dim slightly, her posture shifting with what looked like hesitation. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, giving her a small, encouraging smile as Victor positioned them for the shot. All right, everyone say action. Victor called out, snapping a few pictures before suggesting a short video for his social media. Just a quick hello from the three of us, if you don't mind, Keanu? Keanu agreed, and they recorded a brief clip, mostly Victor talking while Keanu and Sophie waved at the camera. As Victor lowered his phone, his hand landed on Sophie's shoulder again, this time with a squeeze that seemed just a bit too firm. All right, sweetheart, time for you to go, he said, his voice slightly more clipped as he tugged her arm lightly. Sophie nodded, but the enthusiasm she had just moments ago had faded. Keanu noticed the subtle shift in her expression, the way her shoulders slumped just slightly. Victor turned back to Keanu with the same polished smile. Well, we should let you get back to your evening, Mr. Reeves. Perhaps we'll chat more later. Definitely, Keanu replied, his eyes flicking between Victor and Sophie. It was a pleasure meeting you both. Sophie cast a fleeting glance at Keanu, her earlier excitement replaced by something quieter. Dutifully, she followed her father, her denim jacket shifting slightly as she stumbled to keep up with his brisk pace. Keanu exhaled slowly, shaking off the strange feelings settling in his gut. He turned his attention back to the silent auction, strolling past displays of rare memorabilia and intricate jewelry, pausing to admire a vintage guitar signed by legends of the industry. Then, he heard it. A hushed but unmistakably sharp tone, barely audible over the murmur of the event. You happy now? Victor's voice was low, tight with something dangerously close to anger. Keanu's attention snapped toward the sound. Through the narrow gap of a slightly ajar door, he caught a glimpse, Victor's hand clamped around Sophie's arm, her small frame recoiling slightly. With a swift motion, Victor shoved her forward. The door swung open just enough for Keanu to see Victor handing her off to a staff member. The staffer, dressed in a tailored uniform, gently took Sophie by the shoulders and led her down a corridor, away from the main lounge area. Keanu's stomach tightened. Something wasn't right. He made his way toward Victor, who was now adjusting his cufflinks, his posture relaxed, too relaxed. Everything all right? Keanu asked, keeping his tone calm but laced with quiet concern. Victor turned to him, his face a mask of composure. Oh, everything's fine, he replied smoothly. Just time for Sophie to head to the kids' area. She needs to have dinner with the other children since it's getting late and the event is starting soon. His smile returned, but his eyes remained cold. You know how it is with kids at these events, always got to keep them on schedule. Keanu studied him for a beat, instincts flaring, but Victor's polished exterior didn't crack. Before he could press further, Victor clapped him lightly on the shoulder. If you'll excuse me, I need to greet some newly arrived guests. Without waiting for a response, he strode away, his charm fully intact as he extended a hand to another VIP. Keanu remained where he was, his gaze lingering on the door Sophie had disappeared through. The glitz of the gala suddenly felt thinner, the luxury unable to mask the unease gnawing at the edges of the night. Left alone, Keanu tried to shake the feeling. He moved back toward the auction displays, pretending to study the intricate details of each item, but his mind was elsewhere. Something about Victor's behavior with Sophie had triggered an instinct he couldn't ignore. And Keanu Reeves had learned long ago, when something doesn't feel right, it usually isn't. Discreetly, Keanu pulled out his phone, his fingers moving swiftly as he searched for information on Victor Langham. The internet was flooded with articles praising the man, his successful career as a high-profile event organizer, his extensive charity work, his seemingly picture-perfect family life. But something didn't sit right. The contrast between the polished public figure and the unsettling glimpse of his private behavior gnawed at Keanu. He was so lost in thought that he almost didn't notice someone approaching from behind until a firm hand clasped his shoulder, pulling him back to the moment. Instinctively, he turned, only to find himself face to face with Jacob Lee, a well-known director and an old friend from a past film project. "You made it," Jacob greeted with a grin, his voice warm with familiarity. "Thought you might ghost us for some remote cabin somewhere." Keanu chuckled, grateful for the distraction from his troubled thoughts. "I almost did," he admitted, gesturing vaguely at the lively room. "But this seemed important." Jacob nodded, eyes twinkling with amusement. "Well, I'm glad you decided to grace us with your presence. Come on, let's grab a seat and catch up properly." The two men made their way to a quieter corner of the lounge, settling into plush velvet armchairs. Keanu nursed the last of his whiskey while Jacob signaled a waiter for a scotch. "So," Jacob began, leaning back comfortably, "what's new in the world of Keanu Reeves? Any exciting projects on the horizon?" Keanu smiled, appreciating the easy rapport between them. "A few things in the works," he replied, deliberately vague. "But you know how it is, can't say too much until the contracts are signed." Jacob laughed. "Always the man of mystery. But seriously, I've been hearing whispers about a potential sci-fi epic. Any truth to that?" As they slipped into an easy conversation about upcoming projects, industry changes, and Keanu's recent charity work, he found himself relaxing for the first time that evening. They swapped stories, traded insights about the shifting landscape of Hollywood, and pointed out familiar faces across the room, rising stars, controversial producers, socialites climbing the ranks of high society. Then, Jacob nodded toward a group near the bar. "Oh, speaking of rising stars," he said, "have you met the Langhams yet? Victor and his wife are quickly becoming the go-to event organizers for all the A-list parties." At the mention of Victor's name, Keanu's unease returned like a shadow creeping back into his mind. He kept his voice casual. "I met Victor briefly earlier," he said. "Seemed intense." Jacob's brows lifted slightly. "Intense is one way to put it. The guy's known for his temper, especially when he's had a few drinks. But his connections are solid, and his charity work is impressive." Keanu nodded slowly, his gaze scanning the room until it landed on Victor. The man was in animated conversation with a group of executives, his booming laugh echoing across the lounge. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Victor gave Keanu a short, calculated nod, acknowledgement, but nothing more, before turning back to his companions, his charisma dialed back up as if their previous interaction had never happened. Keanu hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Jacob, have you ever heard anything concerning about Victor? Particularly about his family?" Jacob's expression shifted slightly, his brow furrowing. "Concerning? Not really. I mean, there are always rumors in this town, but nothing concrete." "Why do you ask?" Keanu debated how much to say. "Just something I noticed earlier." "Probably nothing." Jacob studied him for a long moment before leaning in slightly. "Look, Keanu, I know you. If something's bothering you, it's usually for a good reason. But tread carefully, all right? Victor's got a lot of pull in this town. He's not the kind of guy who takes criticism well." As if on cue, the sound of a bell rang out, cutting through the hum of conversation. Near the entrance, Victor stood with his signature polished smile, commanding the room's attention as he addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're all enjoying the evening so far," he announced smoothly. "Just a quick reminder that the gala will be starting soon, so please take a moment to examine the silent auction items if you haven't already. And of course, don't forget to make your way to the red carpet for photos before we begin the main event." A ripple of movement followed as guests shifted toward the auction displays and the photo areas. But Keanu couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. He turned to Jacob with an apologetic nod. "I need to step away for a moment, restroom before the gala starts." Jacob waved him off. "Go for it. Just don't disappear on me again." Keanu navigated through the sea of well-dressed guests, their conversations buzzing with anticipation for the night ahead. The VIP lounge's bathroom was occupied, so he approached a staff member at the entrance who directed him toward another restroom down the corridor. Following the directions, he stepped away from the lively lounge into the relative quiet of the hotel's hallways. The plush carpet muffled his footsteps as he walked, the sounds of the party fading behind him. As he rounded a corner, he nearly collided with a small figure hurrying in the opposite direction. It was Sophie. Her eyes were wide, her breath quickened as if she had been running. And the moment she saw Keanu, she froze. Something was very, very wrong. The girl looked up, surprise flashing across her face as she recognized Keanu. For a brief moment, she seemed torn between wanting to greet him and the impulse to shy away. Sensing her hesitation, Keanu offered a warm, reassuring smile. "Hey there, Sophie," he said gently. "We meet again. Are you looking for your father?" Sophie's eyes flickered nervously down the hallway before returning to his face. She hesitated, then shook her head. "No. I'm looking for my mom. Have you seen her?" Keanu crouched down to her level, concern etching into his features. "I'm afraid I haven't," he admitted. "I think your dad is still in the VIP lounge, though. Should we go find him?" At the mention of her father, Sophie visibly tensed. "No," she said quickly, too quickly. Then, as if catching herself, she lowered her voice. "I mean, I don't want to be with him right now." Keanu's concern deepened. His voice remained calm, steady. "Is everything okay, Sophie? You seem upset." Sophie bit her lip, hesitating. Then, in a small, trembling voice, she asked, "Mr. Reeves, can I stay with you? Can you protect me, like you do in the movies?" The question caught Keanu off guard. A mixture of confusion and worry flooded through him. "Protect you?" he echoed gently. "Sophie, what do you mean? What do you need protection from?" Sophie's eyes welled up, but she struggled to find the words. Finally, she whispered, I know you're a hero. Can you be a hero now?" Keanu's heart clenched. He placed a hand on her shoulder, careful to move slowly so as not to startle her. "Sophie," he said, his voice low and sincere, "I want to help you. But I need to understand what's wrong. Can you tell me why you're scared?" She opened her mouth as if to speak, then shut it again, shaking her head. The fear in her eyes was undeniable, and Keanu realized that pressing her further might only make things worse. Instead, he exhaled slowly and spoke softly. "Listen to me. You're being very brave right now. And if you need help, you can always come to me, okay? I promise, I'll do whatever I can." Sophie nodded slightly, a flicker of hope in her expression. "For now," Keanu continued, "why don't we find a staff member? Maybe they can help locate your mom, or at least take you somewhere safe while you wait for her." Sophie hesitated, her small hands twisting the hem of her denim jacket. Then, finally, she nodded again. "Okay," she said quietly. Keanu stood, offering a reassuring smile. "Let's go back to the lounge and ask someone for help. Does that sound good?" As they turned to walk back, Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. The contrast between Sophie's excitement earlier and the fear now etched on her face sent alarm bells through his mind. His instincts, honed over years of reading people both on and off screen, were fully engaged. They had barely taken a few steps when Sophie suddenly froze. Her entire body went rigid, her small fingers clutching at Keanu's sleeve. Keanu followed her wide-eyed gaze. Victor was striding down the hallway toward them. His expression was controlled, his polished mask still in place, but there was no mistaking the fire smoldering just beneath it. Keanu felt Sophie shrink behind him. His body instinctively shifted, subtly positioning himself between her and Victor. He kept his exterior calm, years of acting making it second nature to mask his growing concern. "There you are, Sophie," Victor said, his voice coated in strained pleasantness. "I've been looking for you everywhere. The staff in the children's area mentioned you ran off again. You know you're not supposed to wander around like that." Before Keanu could respond, Victor was already reaching for Sophie, his fingers curling around her arm. She flinched, and Keanu's sharp eyes caught the way Victor's knuckles whitened with the force of his grip. "Mr. Langham," Keanu interjected smoothly, keeping his voice neutral, "Sophie was just looking for her mother. Maybe we could." Victor raised a hand, cutting him off with a forced smile. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Reeves," he said, his tone laced with a hollow warmth. "Her mother is in a very important meeting and simply can't step away. Sophie knows she's expected to remain in the children's area." His grip on Sophie's arm didn't loosen. "Now, if you'll excuse us." Keanu's jaw tightened as he watched Victor turn toward the winding staircase leading to the upper levels. Sophie twisted slightly, casting one last pleading glance toward Keanu. And his instincts screamed at him. But what could he do? He didn't have proof. He couldn't just interfere in someone else's family matters without knowing the full story. For now, all he could do was watch, frustration and unease settling deep in his chest. Victor led Sophie away, his perfectly composed demeanor never faltering. Keanu remained rooted in place, his mind racing. He needed to think, needed to figure out how to handle this without making things worse. He exhaled sharply and turned down the corridor toward the restroom. Maybe a moment of solitude would clear his head. Inside, the ambient hum of the exhaust fan filled the quiet space. The cool marble counters and dim lighting offered a stark contrast to the chaos swirling in his mind. Keanu turned on the faucet, washing his hands as he stared at his reflection in the mirror. His jaw was still tight. He needed to stay grounded, not jump to conclusions. But just as he exhaled, willing himself to let go of the tension, a sound caught his attention. Muffled voices, low but urgent, just outside the restroom door. Keanu stilled, his body instinctively tuning in. Something was happening. And this time, he wasn't about to ignore it. As Keanu washed his hands, he caught Victor Langham's sharp, anger-tinged voice outside the restroom. Softer and hesitant, Sophie's voice trembled in response. "What were you thinking, wandering off alone?" Victor hissed, his polished charm gone. "You're supposed to stay in the children's area. Why can't you just behave for once?" "I was looking for Mom. Where is she?" Sophie's voice was barely a whisper. Victor's response was curt. "She's busy with the guests. Now, you're going back to the children's room, or I'll have the staff take you there. Or maybe you prefer I call the driver to take you home. You know what that means when I get there." Keanu's stomach tightened at the threat. He quickly dried his hands, debating his next move. Before he could act, the restroom door swung open and Victor stepped in. His surprise at seeing Keanu quickly morphed into a forced smile. "Ah, Keanu, there you are," he said, his voice suddenly jovial. "I thought you went back to the lounge." Keanu kept his expression neutral. "Just needed to use the restroom. The one in the lounge was occupied." Victor engaged in small talk about the auction, but Keanu saw through the act. Victor's gaze flickered toward the door, his pupils dilated, the faint smell of alcohol clinging to him. He was off balance. "You okay, Victor? You seem distracted." Victor's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he tightened his grip on Keanu's arm. "You should probably head back to the lounge. Paparazzi have been sneaking in, and the event is about to start." The undertone of control in his voice was unmistakable. Keanu nodded. "Of course. Thanks for the heads up." As he walked away, he cast a glance over his shoulder. Victor was watching him, his expression unreadable. Something was definitely wrong with the Langham family. Back in the VIP lounge, excitement filled the air as guests prepared for the red carpet. Large monitors displayed live feeds of photographers and fans gathering outside. Keanu scanned the room, searching for any sign of Sophie's mother, Barbara Langham. He had only seen her briefly in an online profile, but she was nowhere in sight. Instead, he ran into Jacob Lee again. "There you are." Jacob clapped a hand on Keanu's shoulder. "For a second, I thought you bailed." Keanu forced a smile. "Just stepped away for a bit. By the way, have you seen Barbara Langham?" Jacob raised an eyebrow. "Barbara? No, she hasn't shown up yet. But I did see Victor heading outside a while ago. He didn't look happy." "Why do you ask?" Before Keanu could answer, a staff member interrupted. "Gentlemen, we're ready to begin the red carpet procession. Please make your way to the staging area." Jacob grinned. "Well, let's give the people what they want." Keanu nodded, falling into step beside him, though his thoughts remained elsewhere. At the red carpet entrance, celebrities lined up for their moment in the spotlight. Keanu adjusted his suit, preparing for the cameras, when suddenly a commotion erupted behind him. A small figure pushed past security and clung to his leg. "Mr. Reeves, help me, please." Keanu looked down. Sophie. Tears streaked her face, and as he crouched to shield her from the flashing cameras, his heart dropped at the sight of bruises covering her arms, some old, some fresh. Protective instincts kicked in immediately. "Sophie, I'm here," he said softly. "Let's get you somewhere safe." He swiftly led her backstage, away from the media frenzy. "Sophie, what happened?" Keanu asked, crouching to meet her eyes. "Are you hurt?" Her voice shook. "I couldn't stay in the children's area anymore. I was scared." Keanu's gaze darkened. "Sophie, who hurt you?" Before she could answer, footsteps stormed into the backstage area. Victor Langham. His face was flushed with anger, though he quickly attempted to mask it with a forced smile. "Ah, Mr. Reeves," he said, his tone dripping with fake charm. "Thank you for finding my daughter. But I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding." Keanu didn't budge. "Then perhaps you can explain the bruises on her arms." Victor let out a forced laugh. "Oh, kids play rough. She's a little tomboy, always getting into scrapes." He turned to Sophie, his voice sharpening. "Sweetheart, come here. It's time to go home." Sophie shrank back. Keanu placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "Sophie," he said gently, "why don't you tell us what really happened?" Victor stepped forward, but Keanu raised a hand, stopping him. "Mr. Langham, I think Sophie is old enough to speak for herself." Tears welled in Sophie's eyes. Her voice, though trembling, grew stronger. "It wasn't from playing," she admitted. "Dad hits me. And Mom too. He does it all the time." Victor's mask shattered. "She's lying," he snapped. "She doesn't know what she's saying." But Sophie pressed on, her small hands clenching into fists. "Before the event, he hit me because I didn't want to wear the denim jacket. It scratches my skin, it hurts when I move. But he made me wear it anyway. He said it hid the bruises." Victor's face turned red with fury. "Enough," he roared, lunging forward. But Keanu moved faster. With lightning reflexes, he blocked Victor's swing, gripping his arm in a firm hold. "You've done enough," Keanu said, his voice like steel. "I've heard about your temper, but this isn't just temper. This is abuse." Victor struggled against Keanu's grip, but Keanu didn't let go. He turned to the security guard standing nearby. "Shut down the event," he ordered. "Call the police. Now." For a moment, the guards hesitated, uncertain whether to intervene against such a powerful man. Keanu's voice hardened. "Did you hear me? This man is abusing his family. Shut it down. One of the guards sprang into action, speaking into his radio. Another pulled out a phone to dial 911. Victor's face drained of color as the weight of the situation hit him. You can't do this, he seethed. Do you have any idea who I am? Keanu didn't flinch. I know exactly who you are. Sirens echoed in the distance. Security surrounded Victor as he was taken into custody, his threats growing weaker with each passing second. Meanwhile, Sophie clung to Keanu, her small frame shaking. You're safe now, Keanu whispered. No one is taking you back to him. Just then, a staff member hesitantly stepped forward. I know where Mrs. Langham is, he admitted. Keanu and the officers followed the staff member down a secluded corridor to a private room. Inside, Barbara Langham sat alone, dressed for an appearance she was never meant to make. Is it time for the photos? She asked, confused. But before anyone could respond, Sophie broke free and ran to her. Mom. Barbara's confusion melted into relief as she wrapped her daughter in a tight embrace. What happened? She asked, her voice trembling. Where's Victor? Keanu stepped forward. Your husband has been arrested. Sophie told us everything. Barbara's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know how to get out, she whispered. He kept us isolated, but it just got worse. The detective spoke gently. Mrs. Langham, we need your statement. We'll take you and Sophie to safety. Barbara straightened, holding Sophie close. I want to press charges. This ends now. As she and Sophie were led to safety, Barbara turned to Keanu. Thank you. For believing her. For standing up for us. Keanu shook his head. No thanks needed. Just focus on healing. As the police car pulled away, Keanu stood at the entrance, watching it disappear. He knew the battle wasn't over. There would be consequences. Backlash. But as he thought of Sophie's newfound courage, he knew he had made the right choice.